like to call the work session to order on February 25th, 2019. Councilman Stipp, are you there? Hello? All right, well, you remind me to check now and then through this. Council, just nod. Okay, all right. You'll help me with this, all right, so I don't forget. All right, we're still waiting for Councilman Campbell. Does anybody know? All right, well, we'll announce she's here when she arrives. So then let's go on down to item 3.1. It's a presentation on the capital improvement plan, which we refer to as CIP. The presentation includes an update on the city's goal to achieve a 5-year, fully funded and deliverable CIP by June 30th, 2019. We have before us Finance Director Doug Sandstrom and our engineer, I have to say our super engineer, Rebecca Zook. So you have the floor.
Super engineer, I like that.
I gave you a nickname, now you have to live with it, I know.
It doesn't roll off the tongue as easy.
There'll be a t-shirt soon with that across it, you know that.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. We are here today to talk about the fiscal year 20 to 24 CIP, to provide an overview, to go over what the CIP goal was, to talk a little bit about the economy and the marketplace and how that is impacting the development of our current CIP process, to go over a little bit again, the reminder of the revenues, what was requested, so you can get an idea of the big picture of the amount of funding and resources that are needed and the amount of projects that have been requested. We're going to go over some of the things that we've learned through our CIP pause, talk about policy discussion, and that's what the main point of why we are here today. It's less about the actual 20 to 24 CIP and more about getting some policy direction from the council to help us finalize the recommendation that will be coming back to you. The CIP that we have put together at this point in time, we're close to having a balanced funded CIP, but there are some definitely large issue areas that we need to talk to council about and some policy questions. After we get through that, we'll talk about some of the next steps and we'll take it from there. So to start with, the current year, fiscal year 2019, we developed a goal that we would, for fiscal year 2020 that we're currently working on, develop a fully funded and deliverable 5-year CIP by the end of June. That is very important and that it's broken into those two parts, fully funded and fully deliverable, because it breaks into those two component parts of funding availability. You have to have the money in order to deliver something. And then in order to deliver it, you have to have the staffing capacity, the timing, coordination with other entities. There's a lot that goes into it. It's not just an exercise in whether or not we've got the money for it. There are other factors that come into play. The things that we are looking at on these fully funded CIP, the pause that we took this year, is we had to go back and look at every project, to look at its scope, to look at the cost, to look at the timelines, to make sure we were dealing with information that was accurate and that was correct. For fiscal year 19, in order to do this, council allowed us to adopt a minimal CIP. Basically, we found the projects that we knew had good cost to it, that were far enough along that we could actually start them and get them done on the timeline and within the budget that we established. We then took all the excess funds that were not specifically established to projects and put them into a project reserve. What that really allowed us to do was reset a lot of our project budgets back to zero, because we knew we had bad numbers in them, we knew we had bad scopes, so we didn't want to keep going back and comparing to those. So what we're going to do moving into the discussion tonight, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca, who's going to talk about where we are and what we have done up until this point in time on the CIP.
Thank you. Before Rebecca starts, I'd like to call out to Councilmember Stiff. Are you on the line? All right. And the Vice Mayor is now in attendance, so you have the floor.
Mayor.
Oh, good. Hello, Bill.
I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Over the past 9 months to a year, the city has been working to overhaul our capital program, as well as to deliver specific projects that were approved in the current CIP. I want to quickly talk about the changes that we've made to our program, as well as move into the status of some of our current projects. I will start with how we've modified our monthly CIP meetings. The meetings themselves are more structured than they have been in the past. We touch on each project during the meeting, but we also focus on those where we have issues. The issues could be related to the schedule, the scope, or the cost, and we have deliberate and meaningful conversations during those meetings. The primary presenter for the projects is the stakeholder or owner of the project. For example, Parks presents on the park projects, while the fire department discusses the status of various fire station projects. The assigned project managers are in attendance as well, since they are a key team member for each project. Another important change that we've set up is a clear process for how we document those changes. A project change form is required to be completed so that we're able to capture whatever that change was in the scope or the cost or the timing, so that we're able to document the changes and follow the timeline of any given project. The form also identifies who needs to authorize the change, whether it's the stakeholder, the finance director, city manager's office, and council. We also brought aboard a third-party contractor to assist and assess our CIP division over the last 6 months. John Trujillo joined us with 25 years of local government experience from both the city of Phoenix and Gila County. With his guidance, we have implemented a number of process improvements and will continue to do so. Our goal is to create a smooth and efficient system that will enable us to deliver our capital program well into the future. During the pause, we have continued to work on projects that were approved for the fiscal year. So we have a total of 58 projects that were authorized with a budget of just under $190 million. Of those projects, 13 are multi-year projects that will not be completed by the end of the fiscal year. Those are projects such as the water treatment plant and the recreation campus that go over a number of years. 34 of the projects have been or will be completed by the end of the fiscal year. And then 11 of the projects will not be completed by the end of June 30th. For the 11 projects not being completed, the reasoning is varied. An example would be the RID relocation that's part of the Parks Master Plan project. We have just simply pushed back the relocation of that so it's more in line with the overall project improvements of the park. Another example is the Perryville and Indian School traffic signal. That project, we're working with a developer as well as 2 outside agencies, APS and MWD, and the schedule is really dependent on those, the work that we do with them. As I have mentioned, we've spent a great deal of time and effort on solidifying the project scopes, schedules, and costs during the pause for the 5-year CIP. The stakeholder departments have been committed to owning their projects and participating throughout the project. The ownership and their involvement has and will continue through the design process and into construction. Once the projects were initiated and developed, the entire team got together, including project managers and budget staff. We spent a significant amount of time ensuring that the budget was thorough and the scope was comprehensive. In addition, we were able to bring aboard a third-party estimating firm. This partnership with Mortensen was incredibly valuable, and the team benefited greatly from their involvement. Finally, we are also looking at staff resources, as was mentioned, because we need to identify and settle in on those proposed project schedules. It's critical for us to look at the workload specific to the project management staff as we align the project schedules accordingly, meaning we can't start all the projects on July 1st of every fiscal year. Essentially, in order to have a fully funded and executed 5-year CIP, we need to focus on a variety of criteria, including funding and staffing. With that said, I want to spend a couple minutes talking about the costs and the effects that they've had on our projects. I'm happy to say that for the past 3 or 4 years, the city of Goodyear has experiencing some exciting growth. And for the last 18 to 24 months, we've been seeing a more dramatic expansion in Phoenix area, and again, especially in Goodyear. However, it is important for us to recognize that both national and local issues are causing impacts to these projects. As we are aware, the country is experiencing volatility as it relates to tariffs and the resulting implications to the cost of materials. Adding to this, we have seen a decrease in our labor pool. The decrease could be for a number of reasons, one of which is that during the downturn economy, many workers changed their careers. In addition, and because of recent natural disasters, labor has pulled away from Arizona to work in rebuilding those affected areas. Within our region, there do not appear to be any agencies that are unaffected by the cost increases. I learned a couple weeks ago while attending the MAG Transportation Review Committee meeting that MAG and ADOT have begun conducting an analysis on construction bid data. They have asked all member agencies to submit project cost data so they can attempt to better understand what is occurring in the economy. Their goal is to share the results with member agencies to provide insight and guidance on how these escalating costs can be managed. They also stated during the meeting that based on their research, they expect continued upward trajectory during the remainder of 2019. At this point, I'm going to give some specific data about how we have been affected by what is happening in the economy. The Valley is seeing material costs ranging from 10 to 60%. As it relates to labor, we're seeing a minimum of a 3 to 5% increase in overall wages and a 20 to 28% increase in some of the specialty trades. During the MAG meeting last week, and based on what they have collected so far, it's been averaged that 26% increase of costs in all projects. Similarly, in the past, we could count on estimates provided by contractors to be good for 90 to 180 days. Now contractors are not guaranteeing their costs for any longer than 30 days or possibly even shorter. Right now, this is our new reality. However, I can assure you that we are working together as a team to ensure the very best for Goodyear.
Could we take a break right here? So do you have any questions? Anything you didn't hear quite or something repeated? You all right? Go ahead.
Okay. And there you go, Doug.
Thank you. As Rebecca just stated, as we went through that process, there were several things that we found within the pause of the CIP that then we've put things into place to make sure that we can prevent them from happening in the future, which is exactly what we were trying to do with this pause. We found that some of our initial budget estimates were wrong. Cost increases from the economy, from the market, and so on have been directly impacting these projects. That when we went out to bid and into the scoping of a project, we didn't always keep that available budget in place for in the forefront of our mind for various reasons. Throughout the course of a project, scope would change based on whatever the estimate was today. We had extra money, we'd add a little bit. We would scale back a little bit, or we didn't have a very good documented scope. We were going to build a well. We didn't say whether it was a 1,000-gallon per minute well or a 5,000-gallon per day well. So a lot of those types of things, we have now put processes in place to make sure that in the future we do not repeat those same mistakes. So what we want to do now is start going into some of the overview and the high level on the resources and availability of funds for the CIP. The numbers that you see in front of you are from the 5-year forecast that was presented to Council back in January for our one-time resources. And you can see over the 5-year period of our CIP, we have approximately $203 million available for the capital improvement plan, as well as one-time supplementals. When we look at development impact fees, that is actually more than what's available in the 5 years. What we're looking at that is what's available in the 10-year IIP. So what was it that project was actually going to cost and bring in for development impact fees so that we could look at that. $203 million overall is what the resources are available. These dollar amounts follow our policy, and you can see that on the GO bonds. I show that maintains our $1.74 rate, so we're sticking within council policy. We've got our asset management fully funded, and we've got very conservative forecasting processes in place. Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Joe.
I know at times I sound like a broken record when it comes to the rate, because the rate is just a mathematical calculation. It's got nothing to do with what people are paying. With that being said, all I ask is that when you do get down to the budget, staying at $1.74, I'd like to know what the total levy increase is. What percentage of that is the result of new construction, and what percent of that is the result of increased taxes on the existing residents? I just see if you can do to break that out, okay?
Yep.
Because sometimes when people keep hearing us, this $1.74, and I know way back when the city used to harp on the $1.60, before the state put legislation in there that kind of limited the growth to 5% per year, you could keep it at $1.60 and your assessed valuation could be going up 30% a year, and your taxes in reality went up 30% a year. So again, I just want to make sure that people see the other side of the equation. When we focus on $1.74, that does not mean taxes aren't going up. I just want to see the break between what the new construction is versus the existing, and I'm sure you can pull that when it comes time to budget time.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Joe's got me as the devotee to the levy versus rate, because when we look at, and if we could get the numbers, my understanding is our levy now is pretty close to what it was 9 or 10 years ago. We have not really collected more because of what the legislature did.
Correct. The total assessed valuation of the city has not reached, back 10 years ago, we had the total assessed valuation, which is what drives the levy, had reached $1 billion for the city. During the economic downturn, it had been cut in approximately half, and we have not gotten back up to that pre-recessionary numbers yet.
Yeah, I think that's important for everyone listening to know that we're actually not collecting as much as we were before the recession, because people do get stuck on 174. They see that and they think that's not really what you're paying because what the legislature did. So I think we all need to be very clear with people listening. I know we're on Facebook Live, so thank you for that.
Any other comments? Go ahead. Oh,
Mayor.
Laura? Oh, I'm sorry, Bill. I called on Laura. Let's go ahead, Laura.
Thank you. It's my understanding that when you make your projections that you tend to be very conservative. So these numbers could actually come back higher.
Correct. We would expect that they would come back higher.
All right, thank you.
Bill, you're on.
Thank you. On this discussion about the rate, totally understand that in the levy. But I think the bottom line is if we raise our rate from $1.74 to $2.10, taxes are going to go up. Correct?
Correct. If the rate goes up, if any part of that formula goes up, taxes will go up. So correct.
Right. So whether the property values or not go up, if we raise the tax rate, taxes are going to go up. And I think we have to thread the needle between the rate and the levy, and not pretend that the rate doesn't affect the levy. It's not nearly as it has a smaller effect, but we raise it significantly, property owners are going to see an increase in their taxes. And I think we have to just be careful on how we talk about that, because we can send the wrong message with the rate doesn't matter when at the end of the day it does matter. So I guess caution everybody that there's a fine line in there. We just got to figure out what that is.
Do you want to address that before I give?
No, I just want to say is a little disagreement there, only the fact that our taxes are going to go up with $1.74 anyway.
Yeah.
So, and I understand that if you raise the rate, which means you would, because we don't adopt a rate. What do we adopt? We adopt a levy. The levy based on the assessed valuation is what drives the rate, the mathematical calculation. So you're right. If the rate goes up, that would have meant we would have actually increased our levy. So again, as long as people understand that a rate doesn't mean things are staying status quo. because there's still going to be an increase. So I just want to make sure that message gets out, because a lot of times cities will focus on a rate and they say, hey, we didn't raise your rate. Yeah, but your taxes went up anyway. So again, I just want to make sure that we're clear and then we have transparency when we talk about what this effect is. That's all.
Go ahead.
So when we look at the entire 5-year period of the CIP, our resources are $203 million. When we got our initial requests in for CIP projects, the projects totaled $315.6 million, so considerably more than what our resources were. This, of course, is the unreviewed, unfiltered number that went in there. One of the things that was very apparent in that was it was very heavy in year 1 and very heavy in year 5. So we're very good at what we want right now and what we want in the long-term future. So when we did that first comparison, when you look at it side by side, you can see we had a total of 107 non-utility projects. And for the sake of this discussion, the majority of what we talk about is going to be non-utility. So it's not supported by wastewater or water rates. It is supported by general fund, development impact fee funds, general obligation bonds, other things other than utility service rates. So in that initial request, we had a shortfall of about $112 million bottom line. We've got it broken out into the different funding sources here because funding source matters. There are specific legal requirements and restrictions on the different funding sources. Once management went through and reviewed all of these projects, we got it down to a much more manageable $5 million shortfall bottom line. But again, when you look at the individual funding categories, we do have some areas that would need to be addressed. The other thing to point out here and remind you is this is a 5-year look. So over the next 5 years, this would have $12 million in total for non-CIP one-time obligations. So it's a very tight margin here. Also, you can see the development impact fees are running short. What we have done in the past when funds have not came in for development impact fees in a timely manner, we've used excess general funds to loan to those projects to cash flow them until the funds came in. Due to the requirements or the requests on the general fund, that's not something that we would be able to continue for very long into the future. And again, originally there were 107 non-utility projects. What we're looking at now with the 5 years, we've got 93 projects. So several projects have been pushed into what we consider the unfunded out years, where they're more planning kind of things, just letting us know that they're on the horizon. And then other projects have been spread around to make sure that we're matching our resources. One of the things that you will see when we look at the entire CIP, including that unfunded years from 6 on, there are some substantial projects that are right outside of the 5-year period. So even though we're looking at funding for a 5-year period only, we always have to keep that longer term planning horizon in our minds.
Sherry?
Okay. Doug, I just want to make sure I'm reading this right. So the difference we're looking for after you guys went through and crunched the numbers a little more is about $5 million.
Yes and no.
Okay. I'm with the slides, right?
And I say that because the reason for that is development impact fees, for instance, is very specific restricted funding sources that's short by $17 million. If we were to continue with this and use general funds to subsidize those development impact fees without making changes to the development impact fees, that would set a precedent from this point forward. And that's some of the policy discussions that we're going to be needing to have shortly after we get done with the presentation.
Okay. But it's gone down from the other slide when you crunch the numbers.
Correct.
I don't want people to see the other slide and kind of freak out a little bit.
Correct.
This is
more in it, correct. We're not standing on the edge of a cliff, which is what that first slide kind of shows.
Yeah, that's what I want to make sure people see, slide 1, and then where you've got it to slide 2.
Correct.
Okay.
Brandon?
And you might have already mentioned this, but what did we use to funnel those projects down? Is there criteria, or how did we get to that? How do we what was there, a matrix, or was there a way that we were able to?
Basically, it comes down to what council priorities have been, and then also in sitting down and discussing with the departments what the realistic timeline and need for the different projects are. And when we started to really balance out some of those things, you could very easily see what would push. For instance, on the engineering side of thing, we had over the 5-year period approximately 7 new traffic signals per year. When we really sat down and talked about what growth timelines were, what we could really manage from a staff perspective, we whittled that down to about 3 per year and pushed those out. Now, if growth happens a lot quicker than what we're happening, our revenues, of course, will come up, and then we'd be able to adjust and modify that type of thing. Also in here, we have a large project is the Estrella Bridge, which we have planning in the first 5 years, but the major construction of it pushed out into year 6. That was just a very aggressive timeline that we had in it, and we used that kind of stuff to push those projects out.
Okay. Thank you.
Mayor.
Joe?
Is it fair to say the improvement from the prior slide to this slide, though part of it is the reasoning and because we had to push some things out from a funding standpoint, and then you don't have the resources to do what you're going to do anyway. So that's why it had to be pushed. So a combination of both helps change some of these numbers. If we want to still do those projects, we're still going to have to figure out where to get the money the ones 6, 7, 8, 9 years out.
You're absolutely correct. Even if after that first slide came in, if revenues and expenditures matched up perfectly, we still would not have been able to deliver on those projects. And that's the 2 parts of the equation that we really got to keep in mind is money's one part of it, the ability to deliver the project is another. So what we are going to be doing is this evening, we're going to be asking you a series of policy questions and just having some discussion around those policy questions and basically asking how we can apply current policy and or you've seen how applying current policy has some impacts and some challenges for our CIP. When we go back to finalize the recommendations for it, we want to see what are our parameters and the constraints of the CIP. Are we able to look at revenue expansion? Currently, we are looking at that tax rate of $1.74, which would generate $60 million of bonding authority. We are looking at using the last of our authorized GO bonds. So is that something to do is go out and look for additional GO bonds. In the past, we have used general fund dollars to cash flow some of the development impact fees. We're not going to be able to do that in the next 5 years. Is it okay to look at excise tax bonds where the general fund basically co-signs for them? Are there some projects that we can phase or delay in that 5-year period, even though we have promised them for several years on that we are going to deliver that, but because of different changes in scope and cost and times that we can look at that. We just want to make sure that as staff, we're going back and have the roadmap from council in place. What we are going to do is I'm going to walk through some specific projects. Did I go backwards? There we go. Yeah. I'm going to walk through some specific projects that have been chosen, not because they are poster children of bad projects or anything like that, but they are very high profile, high dollar projects. The 3 areas that we're going to look at our surface water treatment plant, which is enterprise funded as well as development impact fee funded. We're going to look at fire stations and the recreation campus. The fire stations and recreation campus make up about 48% of the non-utility CIP. So they are very high dollar amount projects, and they're also very high profile projects. Everybody is looking for when is that rec campus going to happen. So that is why those were chosen as examples of what we've been seeing. You will see in those the project costs that have increased. We'll talk about some of the reasons behind why those costs have increased, going back to some of those overall themes that we've seen in all of our capital projects. So our first project that we will look at is the surface water treatment plant. The surface water treatment plant was originally brought forward in fiscal year 2018. We rebudgeted in the fiscal year of 2019 in the current budget for a total of $106.8 million. This project was sent out to an outside cost estimator, design engineer, to make sure that we had a very thorough, very detailed, very good cost estimate to make sure that we did not run into a situation where our budget increased by 21%. What happened is our budget increased by 21%. So even though following everything that we do and have in place as to prevent that kind of stuff, there are certain things that are out of our control. One of those things is market costs. As Rebecca was stating earlier, they're looking at 20 to 25% across the board on projects. So we do have an impact here on the cost of materials, the cost of labor, the cost of construction. The other thing is scope changes. One of the things we did with the surface water treatment plant is we only had certain information as far as to the water quality, and we made assumptions on what types of treatment would have to happen with that surface water treatment plant. Once we got into that and started really testing it, we found that we are going to have to do arsenic treatment on the surface water treatment plant. That wasn't factored into that original detailed budget. The fact that we had a detailed budget made it very easy to say, there's a $6 million cost that we did not anticipate. So we're able to come back and really show you what some of those differences are. In looking at the surface water treatment plant, I've got it broken out by the different funding sources, because getting back to Councilmember Loretano's question earlier, funding source does matter. When we make changes in one area, it's very easy. It's something that's completely in our control. When we make it in other areas like development impact fees, it has implications that we have to keep in mind and we have to move forward with. For this surface water treatment plant, our original budget had intended general obligation bonds to be utilized. We've issued those general obligation bonds. We've expended those general obligation bonds, and that dollar amount would not change. Development impact fees for the north and for the south. North is everything in the good that's not basically Estrella Mountain Ranch. It is not north of I-10 that it used to be. We were down to just 2 service areas in the water as opposed to 3, so it's north and south. It is proportionately sharing what the impact of growth is for this surface water treatment plant. Our original plan had it split with the $40 million and the $24 million. Taking those exact same proportionalities and using our recently adopted infrastructure improvement plan for the development impact fees, you can see what the new dollar amounts associated with those in this first 10-year period would be. Water bonds. We are going to be actually bonding for the capacity that is outside of the 10-year period. We're going to be building this project before we've collected the development impact fees. We do that by issuing bonds. Those bonds would be backed by the water ratepayers with the intent that the second 10 years of our IIP, we would start getting paid back from development impact fees. So at the end of the day, the vast majority of this project is paid for utilizing development impact fees. Because the impact on the impact fees is quite substantial right there, what this does mean is in order to continue with the policy of growth pays for growth and the impact fees pay for growth-related projects, this would entail about a 10% increase in the water fees in the south and about a 16% increase in our development impact fees to the north. So the recently adopted IIP that goes into effect on April 1st has this project in at a lower cost than what now our almost 60% design costs are showing. Yes.
Can I ask
Yes, Sherry?
2 questions? The first one is, I know Newland was supposed to have a contribution. Is that showing in this?
Newland's contribution is part of that development impact fees south. So Newland will actually be upfronting $24 million for this portion, and then plus an additional $7 million on a water line that's separate from this. That then gets repaid from the development impact fees.
And the increase you're talking about is to development impact fees, which are new builds, not current ratepayers.
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct.
Joe?
How does that 10% increase compare to our competitors in the area for south and 16% north.
How it compares to other cities, I do not have that information with me. How it compares for our actual per home increases. In the north, it would be about a $1,200 per home increase. It would go from $7,600 per home up to $8,800 per home. And in the south, it would go from $7,800 up to $8,600, so just under $800 per home. The thought process would be we would move forward with the project in the current development impact fees, and then as we've actually entered into contracts where we know the actual hard cost, that's when we would start looking at revising those impact fees.
You know, I'd also be curious because we do have competitors out there and want to make sure that we don't price ourselves out of the market, you know, when it comes to these pieces with water. The other question, though, has to do with our water rates. When are we due again to do a water rate study with our committees?
We will have that in the fiscal year 20 budget process we have for the water rate study. We have a 5-year rate increase that is adopted for our last increase to go into effect January 1st, 2020. So we're looking at that right now to start for the 21 through 25 period.
Yeah, if all reasonable, and again, reasonable is a term that I guess everybody can look at a little bit different, is since it is an enterprise fund, I would prefer to get as much as we can on those that are getting the direct benefit from it, even though right now we've got 7.5 outside of our service area as going forward. But I would like to know from a reasonable standpoint what those impacts are from an absorption standpoint, because with these increases, I don't know if it's 5% increase, 10% increase in water rate. I don't know what we're looking at. So that would be very helpful to get some understanding of what that impact is when we decide policy-wise which direction to kind of go forward.
Let me call out to Bill. Bill, do you have any questions?
I do, ma'am. Thank you. The one thing that we talked about in our small group, and I know everyone on council is very familiar with it, but it doesn't hurt to repeat it. When our original impact fees were released, we saw a dramatic drop in building permits being pulled until that part was figured out. And I'm not sure that us throwing this back into impact fees is the best decision for us going forward. I, in this case, agree with Councilmember Pizzillo that there is a rate payer component of this. You know, this particular project, I think, benefits the entire city because if half of our city is without water or has a limited water future, then that's going to have an impact on everybody. So I think there's some shared value in there, and I think we've all agreed to the $7.5 million or whatever that figure is. But I would hate for us to be pushing in the direction of raising the impact fees to cover this, because we've already seen a detrimental effect on even the suggestion that our rates were going to be much higher than they currently are. So I would be adamantly opposed to us increasing our impact fees going forward. Thank you.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
So in summary, what we've seen on the surface water treatment plant is overall a 21% increase. The impact fees are based on lower cost project than what we're actually experiencing. And the operations is going to have to help finance the future impact fees as we move forward. When we do that 5-year rate study, the bond payments associated with this project are going to be factored into that. Moving on to the next project. On the rec center is actually three specific projects. The rec campus is actually three specific projects. It's the aquatic center, the recreation center, and a 30-acre park. Funding, again, is broken out on here with the recreation center broken up between general obligation bonds and general funds. The aquatics facility being funded 100% from general obligation bonds. The 30-acre park, which is specifically designed at that 30 acres to meet the statutory definition for development impact fees, funded through development impact fees. And then all offsite infrastructure funded through the general fund. This is one of those projects that we funded design only in fiscal year 19 because we knew we were working with bad numbers when we developed that fiscal year 18 CIP project. So it had been at $38.4 million. We are currently at the 30% design on this, and we're at about $63.4 million total for this project. What we have done in this initial review of our CIP is we have allocated quite a bit of the rec center in the aquatics facility to our last remaining general obligation bond authorization for parks and recreation facilities. That is still keeps us within that $1.74 target by doing this. Any shortfall on that, we've taken and put it into the general fund. We have, with our policy with growth pays for growth for the 30-acre park, we're assuming development impact fees would be raised correspondingly to pay for that park. And that's one of the questions in the discussion that we're here to today to talk to council and make sure that we're looking at these parameters correctly, or if we want to start looking at general funds going towards that 30-acre park. That is the biggest area right there where that increase went from $10.6 million up to $19.9 million. Overall, in the development impact fees, that $10.6 million number is what is used. So that is the total amount that would be raised by our current impact fees today. The moving of funds over into the general fund has an impact, of course, on all other projects within the CIP. We're not looking at those today, but those are the implications that we're looking at on all of these in the how they would impact other areas. Are there any questions specifically to the rec center?
Joe?
It's my understanding
Mayor?
when it comes to voter authorization too, that's going to be another issue. And don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting that we go out and sell more bonds than we have right now. Is that's a tool that you don't even have in your tool shed anymore once you get past all these, because your voter authorization will be depleted. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And it usually takes, I'm just guessing, a year and a half, 2 years to get all that thing through a process by the time you pick a committee together, go through future projects, et cetera. So my only suggestion going forward is that we probably take a look at that on voter authorization, putting something together. And again, it's not designed to go out and take on more debt, but it's just like anything else. If you go to work on a house and half your toolbox is missing, you're not going to be very successful. So yeah, they are tools in that. The second thing is you go through here, as Councilmember Stipp has mentioned, I'm always concerned about getting in not competitive as we start raising all these, because I know when we did the last one, we were within the competitive market, and I know we were the first one out the gate, but if we start nickeling and diming these and start raising them, what is that going to do with our growth spurt, especially not just homes, but on commercial, which is our lifeblood for sales tax, because the commercial always seems to run a little higher, on the square footage, et cetera. So that kind of concerns me. My biggest issue, and I don't know from a legal standpoint, what precedent we set, if it's a one-time throw-in of money to try to make it up from, say, construction sales tax or something along those lines, does that create a problem if at some point down the road you wanted to reallocate, the development fees, or are we locked into? Does that point now comes off the table and now is considered, a current?
Directly asking our
Yes,
lawyer.
I'm asking
All
the lawyer.
Frank, would you address that,
Mayor,
please?
members of council, I don't think we're prepared to answer that question this evening, but I think that's what they were highlighted earlier about setting precedent and moving
Right.
forward. So you want to be careful with that, looking at your assumptions you made in your underlying development impact fee studies. So that's certainly something you need to be mindful of when you're allocating these costs. So if council chose that path, we need to look at that pretty carefully and make sure we didn't shoot ourselves in the foot moving forward.
Well, that's what I just want to make sure we don't do that, because I really don't want to make us uncompetitive out there in the marketplace as well. But again, I don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot either. So I think going forward, you kind of need all of that information so we know the pluses and the minuses as we kind of go forward. But I'm really concerned about being not competitive if we get ourselves priced out of the market, so to speak.
Sherry?
I agree, we don't want to be not competitive, but I think because we were the first ones out of the gate, and we were comparing us to everybody's from the last time they went through. So I think it's not going to hurt to take a look, to get that information, to find out where we do sit now. Are we still competitive, or have other people raised them above us? I can't imagine we're the only city facing this right now.
Right.
And if they raise theirs, if they got this information before they raise theirs, we might be surprised. I don't know what it's going to show, but if we could get that information as surprise, Peoria, Glendale get theirs. If we're seeing this, everybody else's labor costs have gone up, construction costs, materials costs have gone up. It's not just Goodyear. So
And labor.
yeah, I can't imagine it. We're just this island out here. So we want to keep that in mind, but I think it'd be great to get the numbers so we can make an informed decision. My other point, and I know we've got the issue on how we go about this, but when we're talking about kind of like these legacy projects, these projects for everyone, at least in my view, this is not something just the people in that neighborhood are going to use. Just like a fire station or a police station. If my house is burning down in Estrella and the Estrella station isn't available, someone's going to come up the hills. So the growth pays for growth. I think we have to look at it as a bigger picture, that these citywide projects are citywide. And I think that we need to look at that, because then my impact fees didn't go to this at all back, 18 years ago or whatever. So I think that's really important that we kind of keep that in mind when we're looking at this and how to fund it and how we can fill those holes and phase if needed and see what we can do to get these forward. I also, and I don't know if this is the right place, but maybe we need to tweak some of our other CIP. And my big thing was the lights. Because,
And I think they've been tweaked a little bit.
we could tweak a little. You save 200,000 here, 200,000 there, you got $1 million. You change the light to the ADOT post, you change 5 lights, you got $1 million there almost. So 5 a year, you start changing that. You talk about it's like a nickel here, so you're talking about real money. So I think we need to not be so stuck in our ways and say we don't want it to be exactly the same everywhere, and say, hey, do we want that $5 million hole filled? Maybe we change our traffic lights. The others are just, I always like the other ones better anyway, but that's my soapbox.
No, I agree with you on that. And I actually talked to the city manager and some of the staff. They have to tell us you can't afford it if you're going to do this. And they have been trying to react to our desires. And we have a tendency to do this in a council meeting. We find something that needs to be, and we don't care what the circumstances, we're saying go build it, finish it. And so for us, our dialogue has to be pulled back. And we shouldn't be saying those things until behind the scenes we find out, is that possible? Next meeting, you can shout it out. But we have done a number of those, and we thought we didn't consider what we're being told now. And I will tell you, this has already been done at a Maricopa Association of Government meeting that all the mayors were at, and we were stricken with the cost on that. Some of the percentage is a little bit higher than what you're hearing here for Goodyear. So the state is in that overall. So we're all got to work together and figure a way out of it. And I appreciate the way you're attacking the problem, and I won't interrupt anymore, so go ahead. Bill, do you have anything to say?
I do.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I dropped off the call during the beginning of the presentation, so I didn't hear the very end. Doug, were you asking about how we wanted to approach this particular project with regard to using general fund money and impact fees? Was that the direction of this conversation? I kind of entered at the end of Councilmember Pizzillo's comments, and then I heard all of Councilmember Loretano. So that was kind of my takeaway. But before I asked my question, I just wanted to see where we were at.
At this point, not specifically. I was just asking whether there was any other specific questions or comments on this project. When we do get to the actual policy discussion, that will definitely be one of those is, are there anything having to do with any of the projects that we have out there that council is aware of that we should not look at when it comes to phasing, scoping, and finding other funding sources?
Okay, so if I can then proceed with my my general question about this particular project, and we talked about it in our small group as well, is there are things that we have committed, and it's not a matter of promise. It's really been a commitment to the community, and this recreation campus is one of them. A number of years ago, we decided not to move forward with a city hall. We decided not to do a lot of other things because this was the project that we wanted to deliver to the community. And the community is very excited about it. We did a great job of getting the word out and talking about the story. We're almost too far along, if you will, to say, well, we're going to cut this project or we're going to try to phase it. And this is a very difficult project to phase. We're going to do a 30-acre park, but we're not going to do the actual facility itself or the actual aquatic center. Or we're going to do the aquatic center and stuff, but we're not going to do the baseball fields. We're not going to do the soccer fields. I mean, this is not one of those projects that you can easily carve up and say we're going to do part of it later. On this particular project, I am concerned about using that as a funding strategy, is the idea of cutting it up and using other parts of it later, period. New thought is, I agree with Sherry that this is a project that is citywide. This is not just a Central Goodyear project. And matter of fact, none of our parks are. Our parks are used by everyone in the city. And if we've got an opportunity to offset some of the impact fees and use some general fund money, parks projects are probably the ones to do that with. And I know that's a discussion for a little bit later in the presentation, but I absolutely agree with that philosophy and would like to see how that moves forward. And if I may, I think we've talked a little bit about scoping, and I think that's part of our problem with how we got into this, and maybe some of where we're at is we talked about dream a big dream and we'll build it, and we probably should have set some parameters. And I think going forward, even in the next subject area, we may need to take a very hard look at scoping and how big these projects really need to be going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Vice Mayor?
Doug, do you and Rebecca feel that this 63 million is a good number? I mean, I know you're going to be conservative, but I'm stunned that it's 25 million more than what I talked about a year ago or less. And if it keeps escalating, we're not going to be able to have a good number. And I know you can't stop some of it, but I don't know. I mean, I just don't know what to do.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And yes, we do consider this to be a good number. I will tell you that we are currently awaiting an additional number from our consultant related to the 30%. So we're going to bring that number to you and share with you as soon as possible once that number comes in. But we estimate that it's going to be very close to what we're seeing here today.
Close to the 63 million?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Brandon?
And to Councilmember Stipp's point, and also to elaborate on that answer, is one of the issues that we are seeing on this one is scope changes. The original recreation center budget did not include a walking track. What you see here today includes that walking track. So there are those scope changes that go along to expand the cost of the projects as well.
Well, did the scope changes after all the public hearings and the public said what they wanted?
In that the budgeting of the rec center excluded the walking track for a future phase, so the budget was never updated to match what the
What the
desires,
public was
what the
asking for.
correct.
That was
Okay.
really the public at that.
Yeah,
opening.
certainly. No, I understand that. I just didn't realize that it wasn't scoped out at the very beginning for the walking track, because that was one of the hottest items there, was the walking track. So, okay, thank you.
You bet.
Brandon, did you have anything else?
Yeah, I'm probably gonna say the same stuff, but so with the park, I do agree that this is something that I think our citizen survey said this was one of our top things that the people wanted. So I definitely want to figure out a way, and that's why we're here, to try to figure out a way to make it a reality. But how we go about it, to Joe's point as well, I don't want to maximize or hit the cap of our bonding capacity and then be stuck and not have be able to do more with it. And then I just had a quick question. I probably should have asked it during the water portion because it's about the water. Is the policy not that I'm looking to raise rates on customers, but is the policy we don't raise, is there a part in here for raising rates on the water that would go towards paying for it?
Not specifically addressed in here. We would look at the bonds and the amount of the bonds, because basically the ratepayers on the water and the surface water treatment project would be co-signing the loan for the development impact fees.
Yeah.
So if there was any kind of a dip in construction where those impact fees did not cover the cost of the project, it would be borne by the ratepayers. When we do our new 5-year study that Councilmember Pizzillo had asked about, we would be factoring that into that 5-year study. So whether there is a rate increase or not, I can have that answer for you in about 6 months.
Well, and not necessarily at the bond. I mean, you're saying about bonds, or are you talking about I get my bill in the mail?
Like your
for-
actual bill, because
Actual
your
bill.
actual bill would be the backstop to any kind of loan that we would put out
It'd
there.
be revenue bond. It'd be
Correct.
on the revenue bonds.
Correct.
Okay, I was just curious. Let's make sure I had the whole part in my mind of where it was. Okay, thank you.
Sherry?
I have another question, and it was kind of like in the slides, maybe you're going to cover it. We're going to get some significant one-time monies in construction sales tax. Would that be something that could be used to fill these holes? And how do we get paid that? Was it paid as buildings are built, or do they come in one time to, I guess, one time, never mind.
With the growth that's happening, we've got a certain level of growth built into our conservative 5-year forecast. So the level of one-time activities that we're seeing with the permit fees that would be paid, and then that one-time construction tax, to some extent, it's covered in our conservative forecast, but they are conservative forecasts. So it's like anything over and above what our forecast is money that would be dumped right into the resources available for the 5-year CIP.
So projects that haven't closed yet, or we just think might be coming, or something along those lines, those are not built into that yet?
Correct. Correct.
Would you like to go ahead and finish this up? Do you have anything else? Yes, please.
The last area that we're going to get into then is the fire stations. We've got 3 fire stations slated in the next 5-year period. 181, which is the replacement of the station on Yuma, and then 2 growth-related stations, 186 in Estrella Mountain Ranch and 188 in West Goodyear. Both 186 and 188 are planned to be funded 100% from growth and development impact fees. Same thing that you're seeing that we saw in the previous 2, you will see on this, is that the dollar amount estimate that we had for these projects that we included in the IIP for the development impact fees is not going to be bringing enough money to pay for the actual project itself. We're seeing some very extreme increases on those stations. With Fire Station 181, we do have it factored into our preliminary CIP using all GO bonds. We do have enough authorized authority under fire stations to do this. It will leave about $5 million remaining for fire stations. Of course, which you can see is not enough to build a fire station, but it would leave that behind on the authorization. That also is within the $1.74 rate policy that we have. The 2 impact fees, would be the same discussion. Our policy direction as it stands today going into it would be growth pays for growth. So we would be assuming impact fee increases to pay for the increased totals that we see on here. Overall, what we've seen, the two fire stations, 181 and 186, we did actually program in the fiscal year 19 budget because we did believe that we had good estimates on those and good budget estimates. We have seen some construction cost increases as well as scope changes that have led to higher costs and in some cases reductions to those higher costs. And what I mean by that is 186 was originally intended to be a 3-bay station. We've actually scaled that back to a 2-bay station, really making sure that it did not affect safety or operational effectiveness. Those are two things that we are never going to take and scale back on costs that would put any of our firefighters or any of our employees at risk, or that would really cut our nose to spite our face for future operational concerns. So the reduction down to a 2-bay station is something that the chief really is behind and feels that it meets all of our operational concerns. And again, safety is something we would never even look at.
Joe?
When we're dealing with these stations, do we have a template that you save some money on redesign because you're doing 3 stations? So I'm hoping that your design is for 3 stations, and that way you save some money as far as on the architectural design piece. Are we going that way?
Yes, thank you, Councilmember Pizzillo. The original design has been done on 186, and we had 8 rooms, and that's where we had the 3 bays. And in order to achieve some cost reduction, we were able to reduce 2 rooms and 1 bay, but that same template can be used for the 181 and the 188 site. So we're utilizing that same template for all 3.
So you should be able to save a little bit of money as far as the architectural cost at that point, right?
That had already been accounted for.
Yeah.
Okay, because I see 186 is about $2.8 million higher than 188. What's the difference there?
And 186 is less.
I know, okay, it's less than,
Okay.
and that's your template, right?
That is correct. So
Okay.
this is a lot of construction costs associated with these and site development. I think it's 188 that has over $1 million in Roosevelt Irrigation District undergrounding of pipes. That's a significant impact to that particular site.
So that's what the 2.8 is making up the difference between that. I just was thinking it'd be a little closer than 9 if that's the template, and I see 2.8, so.
Well, and 188 has the additional rooms as well as the additional bay.
Okay.
Vice Mayor?
So can you refresh my memory? How big was 181? Because we've been talking about that for years. Are we rebuilding 181 the same size it was?
Here comes the chief.
Or are we losing crew space because we have our crews already ready for that station?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. With the fire station template that we would like to build, 3 bays, 12,500 square feet. As Doug and Rebecca said, 186, we reduced that down to 2 bays and 6 dorm rooms so that we could have some savings and costs. But for 181, 188, we'd like to stay at the 3 bay, 12,500 square foot standard station for us. And that would allow us to not only house ambulances in the future, but have the ability to move crews around in the stations so that we have plenty of room for them as well.
But what about 181? That's this. Are we building it the same size? That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
Good.
It's
I wanted to
good.
make
Well,
sure
it'll be
we-
slightly smaller. I mean, 181, when it was originally built, is a bigger station, but it will be slightly smaller, but it will still be able to house.
To house
our-
all that they
our
needed.
needs.
That's
Yes.
good, because I would hate, since we displaced them out of there and we have them bunking with another crew in
Correct.
another station, I don't want to bring them back to a small station and then
Correct.
have them crowded.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have a question for Chief? Or I
Yeah,
keep
for
him
Chief
up?
real quick.
Yes.
Oops.
Sherry?
So I forgot. So for the Estrella station, when we do get ambulance service, that's going to be housed in the other station, right? Is that the plan then? If this one's
Yeah,
smaller?
certainly we'd have to look at our deployment model, but the idea would be probably to deploy them out of 182, which would be the northern
'Cause
Estrella
that's
Mountain
3
Station.
bay, that's bigger.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Joe?
What was the original cost of, was it 8 bay, or the 3 bays and the 8,
The
before you
dorm
cut it back,
rooms,
yeah.
I think we were slightly over 7.2 million. Those are, yeah.
The numbers you're looking up here are fully involved numbers that include all land, FF&E, and so on. So you'll hear some numbers that are construction cost only. It'll be different.
Is there still room for the ambulance in 186?
Yeah.
There
Yes.
is.
Yep.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question.
Brandon?
This doesn't include apparatus, right?
I'm sorry, 186 does, and yes, just 186 will be the apparatus.
Correct.
So,
Molly?
Chief, am I to understand in our little small groups, and Doug, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I was in with Councilmember Stipp, that while we are building these a little smaller, we can add to them? We can add an ambulance bay? Or are we restricted entirely with exactly what we're going to build? And in fact, we may just need to build more stations then, basically.
The way that 186 with the 2 bay is configured, it would be quite difficult to add another bay.
Okay.
However, the way that we've designed it, additional dorm rooms can be added.
Okay, so they could add more crew members then if they needed to. Okay, that's what I was alluding to, is that while we are having to perhaps downsize to cut some of the costs, we're still going to have some flexibility to add a bit later when we get money.
The 2 bay would look similar to 185, which is over at Pebble Creek and Clubhouse Drive.
Right,
So similar type of
Similar to
setup.
that one?
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you.
Georgia.
Joe?
If I recall right, we had a conversation too. One of my concerns when I originally saw what you had there was, what if that area takes off and there's more traffic or more calls? Would we be short-sighted by not having the 3? And correct me if I'm wrong, your response was that more than likely it will be in a different area and we would have to probably build a new station.
Yeah, and going back to previous work sessions that we've had with council, if development starts to come in south of Ocotillo, say to Patterson at some point, we anticipate building stations probably every 5 to 6 miles along that route down to Patterson. That 186 fire station would not be able to serve that far south.
Okay,
We still have to worry about the timing
right.
Yes.
of all
Okay.
the fire stations.
Yeah.
So
Right.
that kind of answers it there. Sherry?
So then I guess this is kind of a question. Are we looking at then to do what we did with Newland as we grow that way? I mean, developmental agreements, is that another way to fund these that doesn't throw that whole impact fee like we did with Newland?
That is how we would look at funding a lot of these. And for instance, with Fire Station 186, the Newland agreement has them funding a total of about $5.8 million. They're basically fronting impact fees. So they will then get reimbursed their impact fees up until that dollar amount. And then any impact fees after that would come back to the city to reimburse us. That's if the IIP were adjusted to reflect the new fire station cost. Otherwise, it would only come up to that $5.8 million.
Okay.
Okay, thank
All
you.
right, go ahead. Chief, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Again, on the fire stations, it was overall 74% increase. The impact fees were based on that lower cost. General obligation bonds are being used on Fire Station 181 and utilizing down to the last $5 million on the fire stations. And there would be additional general fund monies involved there. Finally, the slide we've all been waiting for. It's those, it's that discussion portion on the CIP policy questions. We've already started hitting on and talking about all of these. We've talked about them specifically with council and some smaller groups. And what I will do is I'll just leave this up there and then open it up for council discussion on the various different points. And then what staff will be doing is listening to the discussion and using that as the parameter guidance when we develop the CIP to bring back to council.
Sherry?
I kind of already had my spiel. For me, the park aquatic center, the recreation campus, that's a city project. That's not a neighborhood project. It's not a growth pays for growth project. Just like public safety is not. I mean, the whole city needs to be safe, whether it's fire, police, and I would even honestly throw in there major arterial roads as well, because we all travel on them. They're not just going to my house, or they're not the neighborhood roads. I think we have to take a different perspective on some of this. Like I said, we're not the only city that's out here fighting this right now and just getting hammered. And I think we're going to find that the other cities, as they go through this, they're going to have many of the same concerns we have. So I think we need to look at these as citywide projects when we look at our policy of, yes, growth pays for growth, but the new homes aren't going to fund, the recreation campus. We need to look at developmental agreements where possible to build, have the developers work with them to make sure that the money is set aside for either the pocket parks or, however we're going to do it for those other smaller areas, because we just simply aren't going to be able to rely on either impact fees without them going just through the roof, and then no one's going to want to build here. So I think we've got some one-time monies coming in. We need to look, like I said, traffic lights, other things like that maybe we're saying, hey, maybe instead of this one size granite, we use another size. You save $200,000 or $300,000. I think we need to look at, like you would your family budget. Where can we cut back? What are not needs and what are wants? And I think we need to do that. But I have no problem. My only question, really, because I think you can tell where I stand, is the excise tax bonds. How does that work? What is that?
Sure. The excise tax bond it's said what we have been doing, like what we did with the police operations building, is the general fund had excess capacity and loaned money to the police development impact fee fund. Then as development impact fees came in, we paid the general fund back. Due to the requirements and the requests that are in here, we're not going to have the general fund cash to be able to do that. So we're going to be building development impact fee projects like fire stations and parks, and we would actually have to go out and issue bonds to pay for those. Ever since the recession happened, you cannot use development impact fees solely as the reimbursement mechanism. So we would have to issue excise tax bonds, which means we would be pledging our sales tax and our state shared revenues to pay back those bonds. Mm-hmm. In actuality, we would use development impact fees. But if there was a housing slowdown and there was not enough development impact fees, the general fund would be on the hook for it. So I describe it basically as the general fund is co-signing the loan for the development impact fees. The hope would be the development impact fees would pay it off. We would structure it in such a way that we would be safeguarding ourselves. But if the worst came to worst, the general fund would have to step up to do that.
Okay, that answers my question. I guess just for people listening, you have to know that the whole developmental fund, how they were changed by the legislature, doesn't allow us to do what we thought we were going to do 20 years ago. So we are in a new reality, coupled that with the cost, so.
Vice Mayor?
So Doug, I have a question regarding the bond election within the next 5 years. We will be using all of our bonding capacity now, but we have had this capacity on the books for many years that we've not used them, but it was there in case we wanted to use it. I think it would be prudent for this city to look into doing that again, identify certain projects, but yet have the bonding capacity there so that if we do want to build our city hall mayor someday, we want to do more things for the residents, we have that capacity. Because I don't honestly, without an absolute miracle of millions of restaurants coming and Portillo's coming and Trader Joe's coming, we're never going to have a huge cash flow influx that we could pay cash for everything.
Correct.
So we're going to need the bonding authority, and I think we need to do it sooner than later because we don't want to get behind again.
We've sort of missed out with this election.
Yeah,
coming
I'm
up,
sorry
right?
we didn't do it for this election.
So just so you know that we.
Correct. Yeah, bond elections can happen any November.
Yeah.
And there, as Councilmember Pizzillo stated earlier, it's not something you just throw together. You
Yeah.
generally want to have citizen participation,
Right.
bond committees, and so on. The last bond authorization vote that the city did was in 2004, so it's
Oh
been
my
quite
gosh.
some time since we've had a bond election.
Wow. I voted for that. I remember that. I forgot about that. Yeah. Gee, willikers.
Joe?
You know, I like the overall concept that growth pays for growth, but with a big but, and the but happens to be if we outprice ourselves, that's no good. All right. So we've got to do this very, very cautiously when you're looking at raising those fees. All right. Geo bonds from an election, I tend to agree with the vice mayor there. I wish we wouldn't have waited that long. I'm a firm believer to always have a plan A, plan B, plan C. The fact that we took some things off the table, I think, was probably something that we shouldn't have done. I'm not saying that you should go right out once it's approved and sell and raise things. I'm just saying you want that option there, and when you run out of that voter authorization, you've just thrown away that option. So to me, I tend to agree with the vice mayor. That's something we need to go. Excise tax bonding. My only concern is with that is I do not like using general fund or money for debt service. You know how I was when we did the thing with the Indians. You know how I am that we're paying some of it for the ballpark, but it is what it is. But I always saw general fund for our day-to-day operations. If I felt comfortable that we had enough cash flow coming in, that would be a worst-case scenario, I probably wouldn't have a problem with it. But I really don't want to rely on those to be paying the debt service. It would be nice to see the cash flow on these projects, to see the timing and what the project milestones are, so we see what kind of holes have to be plugged to make this thing work. And I tend to agree with the other council members that delaying the park is a no-no. We promised that. We can't delay the fire stations. We promised that. In fact, I wish we could speed up that one on the 181 replacement that's up off of Van Buren.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be nice to try to get that one up a little quicker. But there are those certain projects that you mentioned, the water, that we just cannot delay. That's why I'm looking forward to the fully funded, the cash flow, and I'm hoping you put some project timelines on there so we can see how all this is going to map out for those 5 years and then where some of this funding is going to come from. Because I think when you see the entire picture, it's easier to make some of these decisions on the ones that fell out of that 6 year. But I think the three major ones that you issued, or three main areas, you can't delay those. So we got to figure out a way to get it done.
I thought you were adding another suggestion.
No.
I got scared. No. Laura?
Well, as someone who's going through this cycle for the first time, I'm certainly listening and learning. First off, I want to thank you for your due diligence and your transparency about lessons learned along the way. And certainly there's going to be a need to continue to be vigilant on managing these projects. Certainly the fire station are necessities. The water treatment is a necessity. But I also feel the same way about the recreation center. We are creating a destination here for Goodyear. Not only will our residents enjoy it, but others will come here. I think it will also be an economic generator as well, as people come into town for games or various activities they have, just as they do in our other places. I think delaying it would probably just increase the the expenses as well. It's not going to get any cheaper, at least certainly in our current climate. So appreciate the creativity and the willingness to explore all the options.
Brandon?
Also, thank you and your team for putting together this. I wish there were more options, but I know we have certain things we can pull from. But yeah, so going down the list here, so the development impact fees, I'm not sure if I'm on board with changing those right now. Maybe if we see other cities and we become the lowest person in the block, maybe we should go and look at those again and see if there's an opportunity there. But it sounds like the geo bonds are probably the best solution. I don't necessarily love creating more debt, but it seems like the best option to go out to the voters and ask them what they think and if they want to continue to pay for these projects as well. I do agree that the top three that we just went over are things that we need to do because we promised the citizens we were going to, and the water's growth and the fire stations are growth, and then the residents all said they wanted a new park, so I think that'd be something good. But we should look at which I know you already have, but I haven't seen all the other projects that are out there, and those other ones might be, maybe there's some opportunities there to look at the scope or potentially delaying or looking at different ways to change the order of how we're going to do those. So, but I don't know each individual project, but I know those three that you went over are important to me, and I think the residents really want those as well. Excise tax, I'm not too excited about the general fund being used as a co-signer. I don't want to get ourselves in trouble with being on the hook if something stops, or just, I'd rather go the other routes of the other ones. And I'm hopeful that, maybe we'll get a lot more construction tax and things, and those will maybe catch up or make up for some of the losses that we have, or have more revenue with all this potential future growth. But I don't want to have to rely on it or depend on it if we come to a spot where we can't pay for it, and then there's no money there to actually pay for whatever we want to do. So that makes sense. So,
Joe?
yeah.
Just one thing from a strategy standpoint. Do you ever think about maybe some of these big projects that are coming in, something like we did with the ballpark, a sinking fund, taking some of the construction sales tax that we weren't expecting, set it aside so we have some cash reserves. So we build up that cash over time to try to fill some of these holes that we have as a result of the spikes in the cost, almost like we did with the ballpark, which allowed us to pay those debt service without skipping a beat. So just a thought, some of those one-time big dollars coming in, maybe set it aside, build yourself a reserve for capital improvement cash as opposed to borrowing or taking it away from other projects. Just a thought.
And to his point too, we talked a little bit about that for like an economic development fund, and using that one-time money, since we're growing so rapidly, to where's the best bang for the buck. And if it's this, or if it's something else we can do, just trying to build that as a fund to save for the future and have strategic ways to actually use that money. So.
I know the time. No. Don't worry. We don't have public hearing tonight. So, Bill, are you still there?
Yes, ma'am.
You have anything, last statement?
Yeah, just kind of taking a page out of Brandon's book, the going down the line, I'm absolutely opposed to increasing the development impact fees. It would have to be a real good hard sell for me to see what everyone else has done. But at this point, I don't think that should be our first turn. Using other resources to pay for the growth-related projects, I think we talked about that. I kind of explained my position on the rec center, and I think some of the fire station issues, 181 is the only one that's really going to be beneficial to the entire city. Everything else are going to be growth-related, especially the ones down south. So I'm not sure if general fund is really the way to go forward with that. Scoping of the project, I think, should always be on the table. We should really look at that very hard. I'm certainly in favor of putting together a bond election group and having them look at that. I think as the citizens want to move forward, raising those bond limits. I'm not a big supporter of the idea of taking that tax rate from $1.74 much higher. I need to have more information on what does that look like and what is the result. Excise tax bonds, the way I understood them originally was we use the excise tax to pay them, but the general fund is the co-signer. But through the course of the discussion, I'm understanding that the excise tax is actually an ongoing revenue source for us. Is that correct?
No, it would be, as you stated, it's, the general fund would be co-signing, and only if the development impact fees did not come in as planned would the general fund be hit by it. If
Okay.
excise tax were not an option, that would mean we would not have funding to do development impact fee projects until the cash actually happened, which would definitely mean a delay on all development impact fee funded projects.
Right. So from where I'm sitting in San Antonio, it sounds like the rest of the council may not have understood that anyway. So maybe some more information on that, because if what we're using is, if it's an offset, I guess the real question is how do we pay that back until those development impact fees come in? If it is paid back with general fund dollars, then that may not be an issue. But if it's paid back with the slow roll of development impact fees, then in my mind, that may be an option. And then finally, the phasing of the projects, we talked about that. I don't see that being an option for the recreation campus going forward. I really appreciate the level of this discussion and getting to the truth of the matter instead of just kicking the can down the road as we've been doing. The real emphasis on getting the fully funded CIP. This is why we've been asking for it for a number of years, because this story never would have been revealed to us. Not that anyone was hiding it, but I don't think we all really knew the depth of what was happening in the construction business until this past year, and that's across the board. And I really appreciate staff working on it. I know it was probably filled with a lot of angst, but it is probably one of the best high-level discussions we have had on council in a very long time, and I really appreciate that. And that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. And so is the mayor. I'm last. So I really believe in the park. We've been talking to the park since I've been in the city center in 2003, before I even got on council, 2004, and when I was on 2005. And as we would, I think it would be a tragedy not to build that. But people must understand that it would give us a large recreational center. That means it's under roof. It has additional rooms for citizens to have meetings in when necessary, plus all the other recreational activity that will be going around that recreational. So I feel that that's extremely important, and it's what to say. Of course, we're going to build the fire stations. We wouldn't even think about not building those fire stations. And of course, I believe in bonding. I've seen it work, and I want that. But I'm really interested about the impact fees. I'm curious, will we be a template for the rest of the cities since we were first on the block? And it'll be really interesting to me so we can make a comparison and analyze the next time this comes around, what position are we going to take? I think it was definitely a challenge for us. And I'm sorry that we were put in that position where we were number one. But I think the staff needs to be yes, that's what I want. I want to give them a ray, yay, yay, and shake their hand, because I don't think there's another city that worked as well during that process as our city did. And we hear that from the developers and the builders. So be proud of yourself. This was bad news you had to bring to us. It wasn't so bad for me because I'd heard it from MAG, so I was prepared. I also heard it from our president with the tariffs. And I also heard it from the farmers with the tariffs and their soybeans. So this isn't anything new. It's hitting our communities all across the United States. So, council, that was a great conversation tonight. I really appreciate you all taking part of it. Bill, thank you. And thank you, staff. We're looking forward to the next briefing. So this meeting is adjourned. I'm going to adjourn it, but we need 10 minutes at least to get the dais ready. So let's say, 10 after 6, all right? This meeting is adjourned.
Welcome to the Goodyear City Council meeting. We're excited to have you be a part of this important public process.